Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
The nights were getting longer. September was ruthlessly kicking summer out. It was about 3:00 a.m., and it was dark outside the window. Nancy was freezing in her bed. It wasn't that she was really afraid of being alone, but she was getting more and more disgusted with the whole situation every year. Nancy shuddered before her eyes. Long-forgotten images swam before her eyes. "Well, why don't we take a walk?" A stocky, tanned guy suggested. "The weather's nice today, so we can take a nice walk in the city." "I don't even know," mused the girl. "My parents might not let me go. They don't know you at all." 2 weeks ago, 18-year-old Nancy met a guy at a festival party. Or rather, he approached her and offered her ice cream. The girl refused for a long time, but finally accepted it. The young people got to talking. As it turned out, Peter came from a small village in Denver. His home village numbered just over 500 people at that time. The young man was outwardly prominent. He had given up rural life in hopes of finding a better future in the city. Nancy's grandparents on his mother's side had also lived in the village all their lives. At that time, only her grandfather was still alive, and her father belonged to the original inhabitants of Denver. He was from the family of an engineer. The girl had no brothers or sisters. Nancy's mother and her father were rather strict people, so she was afraid to tell her parents that she met a guy and he offered her friendship. The girl liked the guy, but she was afraid that if her father found out, he would forbid her to go out at all. She didn't have many friends, so she couldn't tell her parents that she went out with her friends. "Nancy, let me talk to your father," Peter suggested. "Don't worry, he won't scold you." "Peter, you don't know my father," she said excitedly. "He might get angry and never let me out again." Nancy had just finished school, and in September she was starting a new life. Her father and mother insisted, and she entered the engineering faculty. In fact, the girl did not like this profession at all. But Nancy couldn't cross her parents. Not at all. Their relationship could be called complicated. Parents never shouted at their daughter, but it was their family's custom that their word was the last and was never questioned. So, for example, Nancy graduated from music school. Her father simply wanted his daughter to play the cello, and no one ever asked her opinion about it. The girl was short and thin, and it was hard for her to carry such a big instrument. But Anthony was not at all embarrassed by this. But he rejoiced like a child when for the first time he held back his daughter for a certificate of graduation from music school in cello class. "Nancy, you've done well." The mother kissed her daughter. "My father and I are very proud of you." This was the key phrase of Nancy's entire youth, doing only things that would make her parents proud. They were completely uninterested in the fact that all her childhood the girl had wanted to dance. She was crazy about modern dancing, but such a hobby did not evoke any response from either her mother or father. And Nancy would only occasionally close her room, announce the sound of her player, and try dancing herself silly. All this her father had once told her. "Who needs these modern dances? They don't surprise anyone. The cello, yeah. In high school, a girl is exhausted from participating in all the competitions." Her father especially insisted on physics and math. Despite the fact that Nancy received a gold medal at the end of school, she never had a passion for learning. The girl had long lived in her own closed world. She didn't want to let anyone into it. It seemed to her that all people around were like her parents. And when Peter appeared in her life, he made such an impression on her. Just a complete turnaround in her life. The guy was easy to relate to in so many ways. A lot of things he just waved goodbye to, so to speak. On the one hand, he didn't seem serious. On the other hand, the girl saw a mystery in him. She really wanted to know the other side of life, Peter. "You see, my parents wouldn't want me to have any friends," she said with annoyance in her voice. "They need me to be always in front of their eyes and obey their every whim." "Nancy, well, and he will forbid me to meet you." The guy laughed. "Well, what do you think? I'll listen to him. I'm my own boss." That's what happened. Anthony didn't allow his daughter to take a walk in the park this weekend. "Nancy is strict." He looked at her. "What's this all about? You're only 18 years old and you're already walking around with boys." You don't want this to happen, and anyway you don't even know him, what's there to talk about? Peter's a good guy. My daughter tried to object. We're just going for a walk in the park, especially in the afternoon. Did you hear what your father said to you? Your mother intervened. I think you realize that this is not what we expect you to do. Nancy nodded her head sadly and went off to her room. The girl didn't even know at the time if she liked Peter or not. She just really wanted to meet someone to make friends with. Nancy, are you gonna be okay? Just call me, the guy suggested. Will you tell your parents you have to go to school? What if my mother or father sees me with you? The girl was afraid. Can't you go to the park after school? He looked at her in surprise. You can meet anyone here by accident. Trust me. Nancy was very afraid. For the first time in her life, she was going to lie to her parents. It wasn't even a question of Peter. It was just that the girl realized that she couldn't live like this anymore. She had grown up and she wanted to live. And her mother and father tried with all their might to cut off her breathing. At last, Nancy made up her mind on trembling legs. She reached the park, and near the big center flower bed, she waited for Peter. I wish no one would see me. Panicky, whispered the girl. Both her mother and father should be at work right now. Nancy's first date was not easy. After half an hour, Peter showed up. He brought the girl flowers in a gentlemanly manner and offered her a walk. What am I going to tell my parents? Shocked, she asked, looking at the white roses. What have you forgotten? Laughed the guy. You at the Institute today congratulated on your enrollment. You got a very nice bouquet. Do you think they'll believe it? Nancy was worried. I'm already scared of everything. Don't panic. Peter looked at her sternly. The main thing is when you're lying. Look me in the eye. Let's practice. Pretend I'm your father. The girl tried several times to say that the flowers were given to her at the Institute, but she did not succeed. Her voice trembled and she lowered her eyes. Nancy, imagine that your whole life depends on it. With a shrewd look, Peter looked at her. The girl didn't feel like going home. She had already lied once and now she had to do it again. Nancy decided to leave the roses on the playground near the neighboring house. But she felt so sorry for the flowers, so she took them home. What's the occasion? Tonight? Her father asked in surprise. Have I forgotten my birthday or what? Yes, it's at the Institute, the girl noticed, but immediately pulled herself together. In honor of new students, today gave a concert, and then we were given flowers. Looking into her father's eyes, she said, Is that how students are loved now? Anthony smiled. Not like in our times. Until you reached the 5th year, no one considered you at all. That day the girl had insomnia. She didn't sleep all night. She was tormented by her conscience. God, why did I lie? She berated herself. It was so mean, she cried. And her parents are right. I don't need Peter. The next day, while she was studying, her phone rang. Nancy, what are you doing? It was a guy's familiar voice. Let's go to the movies tonight. Peter, I'm sorry, but we better not meet again, the girl answered and hung up. The phone rang a few more times, but Nancy didn't pick it up. The girl decided not to go out of the house until her studies. Yes, and her father had given her summer assignments in math and physics. He was sure that it would be useful for his daughter at the Institute. September was still almost a month away. Nancy and her parents visited the dacha several times and went to Maria's father in the village. That's right, grandfather said. You have to study, and the rest will come by itself. Thomas, we have brought up our daughter well. The son-in-law told the old man with pride. She graduated from both regular and music school with a gold medal. She obeys us in everything. She doesn't go out much. Nancy is our pride. That's right. Grandpa was nodding along. There's nothing to be wasted on the streets. She doesn't need boyfriends or friends right now. Let her think about her studies. The girl took her books with her and studied hard in the village. One morning, she looked out of the wicket on the street was local youth. The boys were laughing merrily. The smiles did not leave their burning faces and the girl's heart ached. Nancy felt like she wanted to drop everything and go out with them. She quickly pushed it away from her. All these thoughts corrected her glasses and went back to her books. There were a few days left and the students were starting school. Nancy needed to take the books to the library. Nancy, she heard a voice behind her. "Hi, how are you? I haven't seen you in so long." Peter ran up to the girl, and it was obvious that he was very happy. Nancy was embarrassed. In fact, she was glad to see him herself. "Let's go out," he suggested. "You want to go to a cafe?" "No, Peter." "Thank you." Nancy blushed. "To be honest, I'm really busy today. I have to get ready for school." "Oh, all right," Peter replied with annoyance in his voice. "Then I'll see you later," he said mysteriously. "See you soon." The girl looked at him in bewilderment, gave the guy a glance, and went on her way. And what was her surprise when on September 1 she saw Peter at the institute. "You study here?" Shocked, asked Nancy. "You didn't tell me anything about it." "You didn't ask," he simply replied. "I was sent from the village for training. Today I start my 3rd year. And in what department?" she asked with interest. "I have agricultural machinery," said the boy. "But I don't like my specialty at all. I would go to the agronomist." But there was only this free place. Nancy, in the depths of her heart, was even glad that she and Peter would study at the same institute. Despite all the strictness of her father in her soul, the girl dreamed of romantic relationships and true love. The first year of study flew by quickly. Nancy and herself did not notice how often they began to meet Peter. After the lecture, when he was free, the guy always accompanied the girl to the neighborhood, and from there she got home by herself. In summer, Nancy usually stayed at home or went with her parents to the dacha twice. During the summer, she had an obligatory visit to the village. That's how everyone was accustomed by her father at the institute in the girl's first year. So there were no friends. She socialized only with Peter. There were not many girls in her course. They immediately split into 2 companies. Unfortunately, Nancy didn't belong to either of them. She wasn't interested in boys, and they didn't talk to her very much. There was one Andrew among them. He was the only one who talked to Nancy about things at school. "Nancy, how did you pass the exam?" a classmate asked after the exam. "The teacher failed me." "He gave me a B. Andrew can't be shocked," said the girl. "No one knows math better than you on our course." "I think I overdid it with my ambitions. I wanted to make myself look smarter than him. So he showed me what I'm really worth." The boy sighed in frustration. "Well, who cares? I study here not for grades, but for knowledge. And your parents won't scold you." "Watch out," asked the girl. "Parents," he laughed. "They never get involved in my affairs at all. They don't care who I go to school with or what my grades are. I was probably about 12 years old when my father told me, 'Andrew, you're a big boy. You need to make your own decisions. If you need advice, I'm willing to give it to you, but always make the final choice yourself," Nancy said in amazement. "I think you're very lucky to have parents. But I never took the initiative in our family. I just can't do anything about it. When it comes to your own interests, you will learn your rights to sway, encouraged." Andrew looked at the girl. "Everyone has their boundaries, and the rest of us have to respect them." After talking to his classmate, Nancy seriously considered his words. The girl was growing up, and she already wanted to live her own life. Neither of her parents understood this or just didn't want to see it. But the tension between them and their daughter only grew with time. At the end of sophomore year, Peter proposed to Nancy that they date. At first, she was shocked by his proposal, but then she decided it was time to start her adult life. "Dad," Mom said to the girl one night, "I have a boyfriend now." Dad turned pale. At first, he couldn't say a word. The mother and her comments decided to wait. "Nancy, what is the meaning of all this?" The father asked his daughter sternly. "Who is this guy?" "His name is Peter. He is a 4th-year student at my institute," she said proudly. "Isn't it a bit early for you to be friends with boys?" You look at Nancy's mother with an angry look and embarrass us. "What's the matter?" asked the girl. "Is it that I'm walking with him in the park together or eating ice cream?" "Nancy, how do you talk to your mother?" The father raised his voice. "What's going on with you?" "I just grew up," coldly answered the girl. "And I want to live my life." "But you know," said the mother in anger, "we put so much effort into you, spent so many years on you not to hear this. Remember, as long as you live in this house, you will not have any boyfriends." The girl was scared, but something in her wanted to stand up for herself to the end. "Are you suggesting I leave?" Dry, she asked her mother. Nancy, but in anger shouted Anthony. You seem to forget that we are your parents and we make the rules of your life. Why? Shouted Nancy's father for the first time. Just because you said so. I'm going out with this guy. The girl left for her room and slammed the door behind her. For the first time, Nancy's parents were faced with the fact that their daughter, who had always been a tame pet, was beginning to resist. It took a long time for the mother and father to calm down that day. God forbid she gets pregnant or goes tame. Maria wouldn't stop. We won't get any shame from her afterwards. And who would need her then? She won't be married into a normal family. Maria, I don't know what we should do. My husband lamented. Who knew that she would grow up and become such an asshole? That's the thanks for our love. And maybe transfer her to a correspondence course, so that she would stay at home, suggested the wife. That way she'll always be under our control. We should keep her till she's 25 and marry her well. And then let her husband deal with her. Look at me. When I went to Denver, I spent all my time studying. I didn't have time for boys. That's why I married you so well. And I have a spotless reputation. What about Nancy? She's in her early 20s and all she thinks about is bed. I don't know where we missed her. My father said with annoyance in his voice. I had her under control the whole time. Did you hear the way she talked to us today? It was humiliating. What is there to talk to her about? Before Nancy's parents knew she had a boyfriend, at the end of third year, she brought him home and told him they were getting married. Nancy, who is this? Shouted her father, looking at the guy. What is he doing here? Anthony, my name is Peter. Nancy and I have been dating for a year now, and I am asking you for your daughter's hand in marriage. Get out of here in a rage, shouted the man. Nancy, have you lost your mind? What is the meaning of this? You mean you don't encourage formal relationships? Shouted the girl angrily. Do you need me to go to the back streets with someone? What are you talking about? The father tried to calm down. You haven't even graduated from college yet. I'll be 21 years old in 2 months. The girl looked at him carefully. Shall I remind you when your mother got married? Times were different then. Anthony started yelling again. What difference does it make? Nancy argued. Your mother got married at 18. At 19, she'd already given birth to you. Then what's the problem? You embarrassed us. Mother yelled in rage. You're a whore. We've had nothing but hand-holding and kissing Peter, the daughter replied. Okay, then I don't care either. I'll get my stuff and we'll stay at Peter's dorm. Don't you dare leave home. At the top of my lungs, my dad yelled. All right. You want to get married? Go ahead. But if you ever complain about anything, get the hell out of our house. As soon as you graduate, we don't want you in our house anymore. In August, Nancy and Peter got married. On September 1, they walked happily to the institute. Their wedding rings glistened on their fingers. Nancy, you got married? Did Andrew turn pale when he heard the news? Well, I wish you happiness. The guy lost, walked away from her. He liked Nancy very much and wanted to offer her friendship this year. But it was too late. Nancy and Peter lived in the apartment of the girl's parents. After the father had agreed to the wedding, he had asked that they live with them. In the first place, so he could control the young people. In the second place, he and Maria waited for their quarrels to blackmail his daughter with it. But the newlyweds had a peaceful life. Maria, I can't go on like this. Her husband once told her. Neither he nor she works anywhere. I'm tired of feeding them both. But let's kick them out. The wife agreed. I'm also tired of all this crowding in the apartment. If we kick them out, can you imagine what a shame it will turn out for us? Angry man. And if these rumors to my work or yours, I'm being considered for director of our office. Yeah, someone could find out. And then goodbye to your reputation, she said with annoyance. And you are at work and irreplaceable employee, and the most exemplary family man, and your daughter is excellent and smart. Unfortunately, I used to be. The man remembered his daughter with unkind words. Let's go to the country house. Let them both go to hell. As soon as we leave, they'll start fighting. They don't want to work. They have no money. So you'll dump your man and come crawling back to us on your knees. That's when I'll answer her. I'll tell her everything. I won't shut up about anything. Maybe you're right. Did Maria agree? It's probably for the best. A month later, they moved their things to the cottage, took the car, and lived there. Nancy was surprised at first, but then she and her husband were even glad. The boy was graduating from the institute and was offered a job, and Nancy began to give physics and math lessons in the evenings. Anyway, it didn't work out the way her parents wanted. At least not yet. One thing was bad. The daughter's father kept calling and demanding total obedience in his apartment. "You have to defrost the refrigerator twice a month," he said. "Music in the evenings, do not listen to household appliances. Do not turn on the apartment, clean twice a week." "Dad, are we living in a dorm?" My daughter was indignant. "We pay for the utilities ourselves. We don't ask you for money. We recently made some repairs in the kitchen and glued wallpaper. What else do you need?" "You're just guests of evil there," replied the father. "Do not forget that until the end of your training, while you live there, everything should be just perfect. You know, it's like we're renting a place." Nancy laughed. "And not every landlord behaves like that. We don't care how other people behave." Nancy's mother intervened. "Don't get cocky. We've been feeding you for almost a whole year for free, and we haven't charged you a penny for housing." "You mean you want us to pay your rent?" "Shocked," said the daughter. "If you had a conscience, you would have offered it yourself long ago." Coldly, said the mother. "But you know, you on your dacha, that's something brainwashed." The girl got angry and hung up the phone. "Nancy, don't even worry, so let her say what she wants." Hugged his wife. She's a couple years away from forgetting about their apartment. "Do you want to stay here?" The girl said in astonishment. "They will throw us out in 2 years." "We'll see about that," he winked at her. "Leave it to me." For the first time in her life, Nancy felt herself between a hammer and an anvil. She did not quite understand the meaning of her husband's words, but a vague doubt crept into her heart. What is he talking about? She thought. Does he want to take the apartment away from her parents? What does it all mean? The diploma defense was over, and Peter became a free man. Nancy still had a couple of years left at the institute. The girl already wanted to work seriously, but it wasn't easy to combine a full-time job with her studies. "Nothing, Nancy. Don't be afraid of money." Peter once told her, "We won't be on zero. I'll start earning good money soon." At the beginning of 5th year, Nancy's parents had a sudden change of plans. They wanted to move back home. "I'll talk to them," coldly said Peter. When Anthony and his wife arrived, "Don't worry, they'll listen to me." Nancy began to notice that her husband had changed a lot lately. He started disappearing at night. He's got Peter's money. What's going on? One day she asked her husband, "You're not home at night, Nancy. To have a good life, you have to make a living." Peter answered calmly, "Night work pays well. Or do you mind?" "No, I just have a bad feeling about it," the girl said quietly. Peter asked Nancy's father to go outside to talk to him. They stepped aside. "Listen to me carefully." The guy looked intently into the man's eyes. "I won't talk to you for a long time. The apartment doesn't belong to you anymore. If you resist, you will not only lose it. I think you've heard of Big Dima. Well, I'm his man." Anthony looked at him in shock. He knew that it was not a simple racketeering, but a serious local gangster group. He turned pale and didn't say another word. "We're leaving in indignation," Maria asked. "What about our apartment?" "To hell with it," the husband cursed. "We are not coming here again." They quickly got into the car and turned onto the road towards the dacha village. "Peter, what did you tell him?" With fear, Nancy asked. He didn't even resent it. "I explained everything to him on my fingers." The guy kissed his wife. They have a summer house. It has all the amenities, and the apartment will be for the children. He looked intently into the girl's eyes. Something was going on in Nancy's head. Dad's so pale, and Peter's staring into my eyes. Maybe he's lying. From that moment on, father and mother never called Nancy again or showed up at her house. What a fool she was to get mixed up with gangsters. That's the way to break them. Now he'll throw her out on the street and take away her apartment. The last year at the institute was the most difficult, and it was connected not only with studies. At home with Peter, they had an ongoing scandal. "Why do you always smell of women's perfume?" Nancy's girlfriend couldn't stand it. Could she? What's wrong with you? Her husband looked intently into her eyes. Is your sense of smell heightened? You didn't get pregnant in there. Don't turn the conversation to other topics. She replied sternly. Do you have someone? Who else would I want but you? The boy asked. If I didn't love you, I wouldn't live with you. And we have money at home all the time. Before the exams, the girl couldn't take it. She stood at the window and sobbed. Nancy, what are you doing? She heard a familiar voice. Can I help you, Andrew? The girl threw herself on her classmate's neck. I don't know what to do. The boy looked at his watch. It was still about an hour before the exam. He took Nancy by the hand and led her outside. Well, go ahead and talk sternly. He looked at me. Did you have a fight with your husband? Andrew, I've been unlucky twice in my life. She wasn't crying with her parents or her husband. And anyway, I think I made a mistake. I didn't marry him for love. I just got fed up with my parents. They've spent my whole life treating me like I'm nothing. They treated me like I was a thing. And I married the wrong man because of my blindness. Andrew, I think he's cheating on me. And he has this weird job. He's out at night. And he brings home the money. Maybe he unloads cars at the train station. A fellow student suggested it. You should have seen him. He never gets tired, she sighed. If he worked, he'd just crawl in the mornings. And what are you going to do? Andrew asked with interest. Wait for all this to end badly. Well, I'll defend my diploma and divorce him. She looked at the guy. Andrew, I'll be lost with him. Then the girl did not even suspect that it would not work out. Nancy said a voice into the receiver. Please come to the police immediately. A week before her diploma defense, the girl's phone rang, and she quickly went to the station. I am very sorry, but your parents are dead. A man in a police uniform informed her. We found problems with the hydraulic cylinder in the brake system. Despite the fact that her parents did not particularly love their daughter, Nancy cried bitterly. She felt very sorry for both her father and mother. The prime suspect is your husband Peter, said the same man. He claims he was home last 2 hours, and you can prove it. Her husband showed up in the office in handcuffs. The guy looked at her hopefully. Nancy, tell me I was home. He gave his wife a hard look. I had nothing to do with it. Confirm it, please. The girl didn't know what to do. She realized that if she told the truth, her husband would be hurt. But if he really was innocent, he could be charged because of her. Yes, I can confirm that. For the last 2 hours, my husband slept at home. The girl said with pale lips. My husband is not guilty of anything. Nancy and her husband were kept in the police station for a few more hours. They signed some document, gave a statement, and were released home. If there is any complaint against you, the investigator looked Peter in the eye, you'll end up behind bars. I think you understand me. The boy nodded his head. From that day on, his life changed dramatically. After the funeral, they sold the dacha, and Peter took the car, his father's Nancy. His night work stopped, and he started showing up at home. The woman shuddered. It was dawn outside the window. Gray silhouettes quickly loomed in their natural outlines, and literally in 10 minutes it became quite light outside. Another night has passed, she muttered. Nancy, we should try to get up. She pulled up to her bed, the wheelchair, and, helping herself with her arms, fell into it. Nancy struggled to make her toilet, and after teddying herself up, went to the kitchen and lit the gas. Put the kettle on the stove. The cold will start soon, the woman thought. How could winter not be welcome? Nancy rarely went outdoors, but in summer she could still go out on the balcony. There was a click, and the front door opened. Hello, Nancy, Peter said. How are you? Peter, what's all this for? Evil? She asked. You're only technically my husband. You've been living your own life for a long time. That's why I want to know about it. Maybe I'm worried about you. He looked intently into the woman's eyes. Stop lying. Angrily, she shouted. Why did you come here? Well, first of all, don't forget that this is my apartment. He answered dryly. Secondly, I want to warn you that next week the commission is coming. Finally, they are ready to give you permanent disability. I promise. After that, you won't see me again. Isn't it enough what you have? Is it cold? Nancy asked. We're fair, Peter said calmly, "Half for you, half for me. I'm your guardian, you don't need anything. You always have a full fridge. What more do you need to get out of my life once and for all?" She said and went to the kitchen. "Can I buy you anything?" As if nothing had happened, the man asked. Nancy didn't answer anything, ignored his question. Peter took something out of the cupboard, put it in bags, said goodbye, and left. The woman gave him a look, and when he left, she cried, "How meaningless. My life has folded through tears," she said. "First my parents and then him." Nancy sipped her tea and stepped out onto the balcony of her Abdallah's autumn chill. She threw an old blanket over herself and gazed intently into the distance. Her eyelids closed from the heaviness, and the woman sank back into the past. Several years had passed since the death of her parents, and it seemed to Nancy that she and Peter were finally getting along. He got a job at an agribusiness, and after 6 months, he was promoted to chief mechanic. "I mean, now that we're doing well. Maybe let's plan a baby already," the girl said. "I will soon be 27. "Nancy, I think we should wait a couple more years." Dryly, her husband replied, "It's not time yet." "Well, what's the holdup?" Was the wife angry? "Wait until we're 40. "Will you be 40 in 2 or 3 years?" he asked unhappily. "Why do you have to make things so complicated? You know, everything has its time." The girl got a job as an engineer at a factory, but she didn't like the work at all. Many of her class had left, including Andrew. There were those who just couldn't make it in New York or Los Angeles. The pay in Denver wasn't very good. After 2 more years, Nancy realized that her husband had grown cold to her. "Peter, don't you love me at all?" The wife sobbed. "You don't have any feelings for me." "Why would you think that?" He was angry. "What do I have to prove it to you? I always sleep at home. I bring in a small salary, but it's enough for us to live on. You don't seem to notice me through your tears," she said. "You have no interest in me. You don't want children. Are children a reason for divorce?" He came over and hugged his wife. "All right, let's take a romantic walk this weekend." Really, the girl got excited. "And where will we go?" "Let's drive to the old bridge," he suggested. "It's very beautiful there now. The ducks should be there by now. So that's us. But we'll see the chicks." "I agree." The girl kissed her husband. Nancy was looking forward to the weekend. It had been so long since she and her husband had been away together. The girl longed for her husband to show her some care and attention. The old abandoned bridge was a few kilometers from the city. Vehicles had not traveled over it for a long time. Several spans of the canvas were completely destroyed, but the locals loved this place, especially young people. They used to spend their romantic dates here, but in this place you had to be very careful. The edges of the road were almost in pieces, and one awkward movement, and you could fall into the water. It wasn't so deep here, about 2 meters, but there were big rocks at the bottom. At first, when the bridge was closed, local daredevils used to dive off it. But after 3 were maimed, this amusement was forbidden. It was about 10:00 a.m. when Nancy packed a picnic basket. She put some cans in the car, some dunnage. Peter set up the brazier and put some charcoal in it. An hour later, they were happy with the kebab and enjoyed its pleasant aroma. "Nancy, look, there are ducks over there." The guy smiled and pointed somewhere with his hand. The girl jumped up, took her phone. She wanted to take not only pictures, but also a video. A mother duck was swimming about 10 meters from the shore. 3 yellow lumps followed her like tails. "How I wish I could catch one of them," Nancy whispered. "How cute are they? Don't go near them or you'll frighten them so." Peter said quietly, "Let's go to the bridge and get a good view from there." "We will see." They carefully climbed up to the bridge. Peter helped his wife around the big holes. Finally, they chose a good place to record the video. "You hold on to me." Peter took his wife's hand. "Carefully walk to the edge and hold the phone in your left hand." The girl held on to her husband with her right hand and took pictures and video with her left. Nancy wanted to get even closer to the edge, but she lost her balance and leaned forward hard. "Nancy, watch out," shouted her husband. "I can't hold you." He tried to grab onto something with one hand, but it didn't work. The guy tried to hold on to his wife's hand, but it slipped out and the girl fell into the water. Nancy's back hit the rocks hard. And further, the girl did not remember anything. She woke up 3 days later in the hospital. Her spine was damaged and she couldn't stand up. "Nancy, how could it be?" Peter cried. "I feel guilty. I didn't hold you." He wouldn't calm down. The girl was in the hospital for almost 3 months. The doctors were able to restore movement in the upper part of her body, but they could not restore mobility to her legs. The woman shuddered as she felt herself freezing. She opened the door, stepped into the room, as alone as she was. Thought she was gone. "And I have no friends, no loved one." Tears flowed from her eyes again, and she turned on the TV to distract herself. "And I'm probably fine," she said out loud. "People are dying of hunger in Africa. Peter at least gives me some money. He's afraid I'll report him to the police. He was warned after my parents were killed. So he's lying to me, a liar and a cheat. He's been lying to me my whole life." Nancy had wanted to report her husband so many times. But first, she had no direct evidence of his guilt. Second, she was afraid of him. After Nancy became an invalid, she replayed in her mind so many times what had happened to her on the bridge, and came to the conclusion that it had all been a setup. Again, the woman wasn't sure. It was as if she had seen the whole thing in a fog. If only she could have been there again and seen that place. Then Nancy would be able to say so with absolute certainty. "Why don't we try going outside?" she suggested to herself. "Not that it's very cold out there, and there was no wind today." Nancy pulled some clothes out of her closet and sat down on the couch and tried to put them on. That was the hardest part. Because of that, the woman didn't like walking very much. No one could help her. And dressing herself was both difficult and dangerous. Once Nancy, trying to dress herself, fell off the bed, and for half a day she tried to climb up on the bed. Then the woman thought she would stay on the floor like that, so grabbed the handrail. Nancy almost succeeded. The woman pulled into the street and breathed a sigh of relief. She decided to ride along the side of the house. There was a small forest around the corner, and the woman decided to drive up to it. Unfortunately, there was no road there, so the wheelchair could fall over. Nancy reached the end of the road and stopped at the entrance to the forest. "How beautiful are the birds singing," she thought. All the migratory ones had already flown away. Then ours were singing. Soon it would be 4 years since Nancy could not walk. For the first few years, she cried constantly after she was discharged from the hospital. Her husband had completely grown cold to her. "Since I became an invalid, you don't need me at all." A girl was sobbing. "Nancy, you gotta understand me." "I want to live too," the boy said. "And besides, it's not my fault what happened to you. The weight of your body leaned you so far over, no one could have held you up. You know the laws of physics. If I'd known this was going to happen, I never would have called you to the bridge. But I didn't do it on purpose. You realize you don't love me one bit, don't you?" Nancy kept saying, "I can't be without you." After about 3 months, Peter stopped showing up at night. He didn't show up on weekends either. "Did you find someone else? Was your wife angry? It hasn't even been 6 months." "No," he looked intently into her eyes. "Why would you say that? I'm just tired of everything. Are you lying?" The girl screamed. "Why did you lie to me all this time and tell me you love me, Nancy? You're wrong." Peter tried to calm his wife down. "It's just that I work a lot and I'm very tired. I'm on night shifts. I've already sacrificed my official employment for you so I can take care of you. You don't appreciate anything I do for you. You lie. You lie all the time." The girl wouldn't stop. "Get out of my house. That's it. I'm divorcing you." "Listen to me, Nancy," grabbed the girl by the throat. "Boy, you better not play games with me. I won't spare you." From that moment on, the girl finally realized who Peter really was and that he never loved her. Nancy never spoke of divorce again, nor did she say a word. When he took away her bank card that her pension was going through, "My life is like a terrible dream," the woman whispered, "and the longer I sleep, the scarier the dreams get." A week later, a commission of 3 doctors came to Nancy's apartment, examined her, asked her questions. "Unfortunately, she's not getting any better," Peter said in a sad voice. "I've done everything I could and taken her to the best doctors and hired one of the best masseurs. but there is no result. One doctor asked the woman to get up from the wheelchair, but of course she couldn't. What is there to think about? The man said impatiently. She should be given a life sentence. A life sentence is given elsewhere, laughed the doctor. We're giving her a permanent one. All right, so be it. Peter grumbled unhappily. I do not understand your terminology. I'm not a doctor. Good, we'll issue indefinite ones. Confirmed the woman in the white coat. Does she do anything around the house by herself? No way. Objected the husband, all alone I and study, and cook and clean, and take her to the bathroom. She can't do anything by herself. Well, we'll think about the first indefinite group, said the doctor. They talked to Nancy a little more, and after filling out some paperwork, they left the apartment. Well, I'm very glad, Peter said happily, rubbing his hands together. As soon as you get your first increased pension, your life will be very different. He winked mysteriously at Nancy. What are you up to? She asked. Are you going to put me in a home for the disabled? Oh, really? He laughed. I should have worked so hard to get you such a pension, and then put you in a home for the disabled. I've thought of something better for you. The woman wanted to say something, but she was afraid to. She looked at Peter with hatred, but he was smiling. But here's the apartment and my mumbling. He stroked his hands. Okay, I'll see you in a month. He sent Nancy an air kiss. Jesus, what's he up to? The woman cried. I can't even imagine what he might do. For the next few weeks, Nancy lived with a bad feeling. Her husband never showed up at the apartment again, and that frightened her even more. Now that he'll have a good pension, he's unlikely to kill me, she reasoned. He'll want me alive, at least for a while. What's he going to do with me after that? I shudder to think about it. Nancy wanted to call someone. She had a basic cell phone, but she had no one to turn to. The woman flipped through an old notebook, but it was empty. She wasn't really friends with anyone at the institute, or was she not friends with anyone? Nancy had married Peter, and he had become all of the girls' relatives. No one socialized with her either. The woman threw the notebook on the floor. Suddenly some note fell out of it. If you need help, just call. Signed, Andrew. Nancy, with trembling hands, dialed the number of a fellow student. But to her dismay, the number was blocked. Of course, it had been so many years. Nancy cried. Yes, he's probably forgotten me by now. Andrew was the only person who not only talked to me, but probably loved me. One day in fourth year, Andrew let Nancy copy a lecture she'd missed. She was about to return the notebook to him, but the last page turned up. The girl wanted to straighten it, and her gaze fell on a few lines. Nancy, if you only knew how much I love you. The girl was in complete shock, but she didn't say anything to Andrew. And besides, she loved Peter, who was already her husband. Nancy drove up to the window and watched how fast the wind was driving the gray clouds. The same dark clouds covered her heart. The woman clearly sensed that trouble would soon come to her. Nancy once again tried to imagine what her husband could do to her, but she failed. Then she calmed down and just decided to wait. I can't do anything to him anyway, she thought. He's the one with his hands free. Let what will happen happen. Maybe this way I'll get out of agony faster. Remember the two most important rules. 1, you always have to look me straight in the eye. 2, whatever you say, you have to believe it unconditionally, the man said. Guy's in his 40s. And why do you think that 18 to 20 is the best age? Asked the young man. Of course, you can try and with those who are older, but I don't advise you to get involved, answered the man. You should be very well versed not only in female, but in general in human psychology. Let's look at the psychological profile of a single 30-year-old woman. Let's say she fits perfectly into your requests: apartment or house, car, cottage, some money and jewelry. What's wrong with her? First of all, she is tired of loneliness, and she needs care and attention. That means you have to spend a lot of your resources on her. Secondly, getting her out of your life will be much harder for you, as the first suspect will be her husband. Third, since she will fully live with you, it will be difficult to hide from her those women you will have on the side. Well, fourth, such gray mice at a young age always have internal conflict. They're a victim from the start, and you'll seem like a savior in her eyes. She'll never be able to see that she's just changed masters. In addition, such girls soon begin to lead a real rebellion against their parents, and this will only be to your advantage. Now, remember, you do not use physical violence, you work only with human psychology. William finished his monologue. The man was not particularly handsome. It was safe to call him ugly. He was a distant relative. William said that she had a serious nervous breakdown against the background of her studies, and the girl was now being treated in a psychiatric hospital. Wow, you're really something. Peter looked at his car in amazement. How did you manage to buy it? It's worth a lot of money. It's pure psychology. And no fraud. He winked enigmatically. If you want, I can teach you. Yeah, but you can't earn that kind of money with honest labor, said the guy. What are you? You got a job with a gangster, Peter. What kind of gangster am I? The man laughed. Look at me. True, William was a short, stubby man, but that one blow was enough to knock him unconscious to the ground. Human psychology, the key to all morality, the teacher said. When you come to study at the end of August, replied the boy. I have a referral for the next school year. We'll talk then. William smiled and patted Peter on the shoulder. When they arrived in Denver, the boy learned that William's wife had never recovered and had been committed to a psychiatric home. I know how much I had to sweat with my first wife, William continued. I was inexperienced then. I jumped at the first one I saw. My grandmother had one still alive, and she raised her. How much effort did I put into getting her to take out a car loan? It took me almost 6 months. But Helen was friends with her grandmother. I had to psychologically crush the grandmother and send her to the afterlife. And then I started working on the film. She couldn't live without me. She cut her wrists several times. Did no one make any claims to you? Peter asked in surprise. Surely you were suspected of something. What? He laughed. That my grandmother had died of a stroke, or that Helen was going crazy because of her studies. Everyone knew she was a straight-A student and was always worried about her grades. That's why I'm telling you. If you learn to control human psychology, the whole world will be at your feet. Now, let's take a look at the people here. There was a big party going on in Denver, and William brought his relative to practice what he had been teaching him for several years. They looked at the girls closest to them. Remember, she's the victim, which means that even at a distance from her parents, the girl will feel uncomfortable. Pay attention to her eyes and her hands. Her eyes are often looking down, and her hands are either fingering or rubbing. Clothes. I think that one fits. Peter pointed with a glance at one of the girls. I think she's about 18 or 19. Not a bad choice, praised the student teacher. Remember that you never fixate on one. You should always have several options. You never approach them empty-handed. This is important to realize from the beginning. Sweets, flowers, small gifts, dessert in a cafe. You should always be the initiator in this. I realize that a girl's appearance may be very different from your ideals of beauty, but I always believe what I say. Looked at him, Peter exactly so patted the guy on the shoulder man. If you tell her that she is the most beautiful, it means that you yourself believe that right now there is no more beautiful than her in the whole world. And it doesn't matter if in a minute you come to your senses and see that she's the real ugly one. Once again, you never go on a date empty-handed. You don't have to spend a lot of money, you can just give them stuff. It's the fact itself that matters. The guy scrutinized the girl. The stranger stood aside and nervously went through her sweater with her hands. She really did look like a gray mouse. Her gray sweater and unattractive long skirt hid the girl's too thin body. She kept adjusting her glasses and blushing. Well, I'm off, Peter said, and taking a deep breath, headed towards the ice cream stand. Good luck. William smiled and took an inconspicuous observation position. Peter shuddered and opened his eyes. It seemed like yesterday to him, and it had been more than 10 years since he had met Nancy. She's been in my life too long, he said grudgingly, but then added with a smile, finally, I'll be done with her. The man looked at his watch. Svetlana was due back soon. The girl, like many others, had fallen into his net, but she had stayed with him the longest. Peter had even considered finally moving into a serious relationship with her and starting a family. But after he had already broken the rules once, he didn't want to take any more risks and never got involved in a relationship. He remembered William's words. You shouldn't have any feelings towards them. They are all victims. And that's their choice. A woman turns herself into a thing of her own volition. Then why not take advantage of it? Are you doing something illegal? You're just giving her what she's asking for, and she's asking you to keep her comfortable. And the only way to do that is to keep seeing her as a victim who can't change anything in her life. Peter thought about how hard it was for him to play a young man in love in the beginning and still be true to himself. Once Nancy's parents moved out of town, he couldn't take it anymore and snapped. Peter no longer wanted to wait for a better life and decided to do something about it. He met some guys who worked for a local gangster directly. The guy never talked to them again, but on his behalf they came to some people's houses at night and took money from them. They paid him well for it, and Peter decided to do away with all the psychological stuff. But Nancy's father, after he threatened him, gathered dirt on the guy and wanted to take it to the police. So Peter's wife's parents had to be taken out, although he wasn't sure until the end that Nancy would agree to cover for him. But the guy used all the cleverest tricks William had taught him, and his wife did everything as he needed. After that incident, Peter decided never to use force again. Peter, I told you so, William scolded. Physical violence will come out sooner or later. And you're going to have problems with your job, just psychologically. There's nothing in the law about it. No one can prove that you drove a man to a heart attack or a stroke, or that you didn't help him when he needed it. It's extremely difficult to do. Nancy was very easy to follow. Her husband looked her straight in the eye, and she believed every word he said. Even when he started disappearing at night again, Nancy didn't want to tell herself the truth. But he couldn't get rid of her quickly enough. Peter thought long and hard about what to do with his wife. No matter how hard he tried, he still did not have the same equanimity as William. It was not in his power to simply arrange for his wife's death or to have her committed to a mental hospital. Somewhere very deep inside him, there was still some humanity left, but the question was still open, and he had to do something urgent with Nancy. The plan for the old bridge had sprung into his mind quite spontaneously. Peter was anxious to get it over with, and he hoped that the girl herself would fall into the worst place, and there he would simply not have time to save her. So when his wife climbed into the most dangerous place, he just kept silent. He would have had no trouble grabbing the nearest pole and pulling Nancy toward him. Well, her hand would have fallen to the bridge in a flash, but he stared intently into her eyes as he squeezed his hand. The guy followed her gaze carefully as the girl fell into the water, looking carefully at what was happening below. He hoped that Nancy would not swim out again. But after a few minutes, her head showed on the surface. Oh shit, he cursed. Now we've got to get her out. I'll get suspicious. He took his time and just stood there for about 5 minutes. Then he went into the water and pulled out Nancy's body. It took him a little while to get into the right frame of mind, and he called the ambulance. Please help, sobbed into the receiver man, my wife. She's dead. I'm asking you to come right away. Because there have been several accidents on this bridge, the police didn't question Peter much. She survived. He complained to William. What am I supposed to do now? Peter, have you never had enough composure? Scolded the teacher. Now you'll be in trouble. You can't smother her in her sleep with a pillow. No, you have to make her realize that she's worthless, that her life has no meaning. Disabled people often end their lives by suicide, so it wouldn't be surprising. You just need to make her life unbearable. She should suffer so much from her loneliness that there will no longer be any point in continuing to live for her. After that, Peter no longer hid that he didn't need his wife and had no feelings for her. But Nancy was strong. Yeah, and apparently she was starting to figure things out. So hated and Peter, that this struggle gave her the motivation to live. The man pushed the memories away from him. Right now, he needed to think about the future, not the past. Finally, the key spun in the lock, and a beautiful girl entered the apartment. Pettia's favorite. She jumped on the man's neck. How much have I missed you? I'm a light too. He kissed a girl. How are you doing at work? And I again felt bad all day long. I'm fine, replied Svetlana Kodik quickly. I'm already worried about your health. Maybe let's go to the doctor. But you know how much my nerves shrieked. With annoyance in his voice, he said, I can't even live normally at home. Well, why don't you stop fiddling with her? The girl looked at him questioningly. I too can no longer so. I want a family of children. 5 years we are together, and I cannot wait for you. I'd do anything for you. She looked Peter in the eye. He stepped aside, picked up his phone, and discreetly pressed record. Did someone call or what? He said grudgingly. I'm sorry. Did you say something? I didn't hear you. I'd do anything for you, Cat, he said. Do you want me to get rid of your Nancy? Light, what are you doing? The man protested. How can I leave her? She's an invalid. I'd kill her with my own hands, so that she no longer interfere with our lives. Angry, said the Light. Do you want me to talk to her? She won't want to live anymore after that. I'll leave some pills on the table, and this very evening she will give her soul to God from them. What are you talking about? Peter was indignant and stared into her eyes. The commission recognized that she could not be independent. She was given the first group indefinitely. But now it's time to throw her out in anger, said the girl. Let's take her to the woods somewhere. What's on your mind? With annoyance in his voice, said Peter. Are you trying to push me into a crime? How can I leave my wife? Well, then I'll do it myself, with a challenge in her voice, said Svetlana. The man stepped away from her and went to the phone again. He turned off the tape and started cursing. I'm sick of these commercials. I can't talk to them. He went back to his mistress. What do you propose to do with her? He looked at her questioningly. Peter, listen, you said that she has an old house in the village, left from her grandfather. Let's take her there. And if the police find out, what will you protest then? They'll put me in jail for that. Don't worry, I'll talk to her. So she won't be able to say a word, the girl assured me. You'll just write a letter of explanation that she insisted on it. She won't last long in there alone. So very soon we can sell your apartment and buy a big house. You said that as an invalid, she was also given a summer house and a plot of land. So we'll sell everything. We'll have a good life, and finally, we'll send you to treatment. For the last 3 years, Peter had been dating Svetlana. He's been completely around her neck. A year after Nancy crashed, he was no longer working anywhere. His wife's disability gave him benefits for utilities and some benefits. He slept, and one might say, lately lived in Svetlana's apartment. But the girl was not his last victim. He still had a relationship with one gray mouse, who was up to his ears in love with him. So the man was facing a choice, whether after Nancy's death to quit all these psychological games and start a family with Svetlana, or to continue playing. But already with 30-year-old Molly, the woman was crazy about Peter. Because of this, she had a fight with her parents, sued their apartment, and expected that he would soon start living with her. This option was more interesting, because Molly's parents had a 2-story house, and there were 2 expensive cars in her father's yard. Molly was their only daughter, so it had to work out. What are you going to live on with Svetlana? William asked him once. In 2 years, she'll start reproaching you with money, and then they'll kick you out of your house. I warned you. You can't get emotionally involved in any relationship. You have to rely on yourself, and that takes calculation and a cool head. Peter still didn't know what he wanted out of life. Okay, first get rid of the tension, and then we'll see, he said to himself. The man realized that he would not succeed like William. His relative was done with his 3rd wife and had a huge fortune. The woman had recently crashed at full speed in an accident. He decided to stop there and not take any more risks. A golden old age was assured to him. But Peter, according to him, was soft-bodied, and how much did he not teach him? A man of the same lack of sensuality was not possessed. This time, Peter decided to correct his mistake. It was time for a new pension, and Peter, convinced that everything had succeeded, he began to prepare for Nancy's move. He had already taken some of her things to the old house. Now he had to proceed with caution. The man was afraid his wife would tell someone or call the police. So he decided to get her on the sly. What do you want? Nancy asked in surprise, when at 1 o'clock in the morning her husband opened the door. Well, darling, get ready, said Peter cheerfully. I'll get a few more of your things. You get dressed. I'm not going anywhere, Nancy protested. I'm going to scream. listened to me carefully, covered his mouth with the palm of his hand. Be thankful I've been saving your life all this time. For years, I've kept the truth from you. Unfortunately, you don't have long to live. I spoke to your doctor. You have advanced spinal cancer. So clean air and nature is the only thing that can keep you alive for a few more months. If you want, you can talk to your doctor about it yourself, but no one will tell you the truth. They're not allowed to tell a patient in these cases. How could they? Nancy cried. Why didn't you tell me about it? Nancy? He looked intently into her eyes. I've been hurt enough all this time by the way you've been suffering. But I couldn't help it. Are you lying? She screamed. Get out of here. Okay, then you will go to the other world before your time. Hardly had he squeezed the woman's throat. Nancy had no room to breathe. She began to choke. Finally, Peter loosened his grip. It's your choice. Either you rot from your cancer in 2 months, or you live another 6 months in the business house. It was the morning before dawn when they reached the village. It was still dark outside. Everyone in the village was asleep. Peter grabbed his wife and threw her into the wheelchair. He opened the old house. It was cold in there. He took the things he had taken with him and threw them on the floor. And remember, I didn't force you. Hypnotically looked the man in the woman's eyes. Did you decide to go to the village on your own? Yes, replied the woman briefly. It was my choice. Now leave me quiet, she asked. With great pleasure he laughed. Here's this for you for the first time. He held out a few $100. I think you'll have enough. Nancy said nothing and took the money. She escorted her husband with a look, and when his car disappeared, she cried loudly outside the window. What am I going to do now? She asked herself. I'm going to die here. Finally, she calmed down, looked around the house. There was no firewood in the room and no water either. The woman had to organize her life. She stopped by her grandfather's bedroom and tried to move to his bed. Nancy tangled herself in all the blankets that were there and fell asleep. After she woke up, to her surprise, Nancy felt fine. But it was very cold in the house. Perhaps it was the first frost of the night, and the house had not yet progressed. The woman moved to her wheelchair and tried to get out into the yard, but she was having no luck. The steps were high, and she could easily fall. The woman opened the door to the house wide open and drove out onto the porch. She hoped someone would be walking down the street so she could ask for help, but there was no one. I have to get the wood into the house somehow, Nancy said through her tears. I'm freezing out here. God, who should I call? Nancy sat by the window for half a day trying to see someone. Suddenly, she saw a man. And please wait, she went out on the porch. I'm asking you to help me. The neighbor stopped and looked at her in surprise. He carefully opened the wicket gate and entered the yard. Who are you? The stranger asked in surprise. Are you one of Grandpa Thomas's relatives? My name is Nancy. I am his granddaughter. The woman answered quickly. Could you bring me some firewood? It's cold in the house. I'm freezing. Do you live here? He looked at her with interest. Are you here alone? I am, she answered briefly. I need clean air and nature. I'm seriously ill, she lowered her head. Unfortunately, my husband works and can't be here with me. The driver. The neighbor scratched his head. How are you going to live here alone? You don't have any wheelchair facilities. Excuse me, will you help me to make the lowers? Nancy looked at him. I'll pay you. She took out the money her husband had left her. The man sighed heavily and was silent for a while. Then opened the barn and dug through the old boards. I'll see what I can come up with, he said calmly. But it's really necessary to equip everything here for your wheelchair. But please do something, Nancy said through her tears. Why hasn't your husband prepared anything for you here? He said in surprise. But he can't stay here now. She answered quietly and lowered her head ashamedly. I'll go home now. I'll see what I have left of my old things, then we'll see. The neighbor answered and left the gate. It must have been about 2 hours when Nancy saw the neighbor again at the window. She joyfully rode out onto the porch. I'll get you while the stove is being stoked. A man came into the house with armfuls of firewood, and then we'll figure something out. I brought you some pies in a bag. My wife told me to give you some. Have some. I understand you have nothing at all. My name's Frank, so you know me? Thank you. Through tears, Nancy thanked her neighbor. She was really hungry. The woman took out one pie and closed her eyes with pleasure. "I'm so grateful to your wife. Very tasty," she said. "But here's another thing." The neighbor said cheerfully, "Now the house will warm up and we can live normally. I'll bring you some more firewood later." "Vlad, hello. I heard in the phone. Don't you recognize me?" "No, who are you?" The man answered with surprise. "Yes, it's me, Andrew." The stranger said, "Your classmate." Andrew shouted happily, "Where are you?" "I heard you went abroad to work." "Yeah, I had a 5-year contract in Holland. I just got back the other day. I haven't been home in over 4 years. We had a very big project, so until it was handed in, I couldn't come." "How was it?" The man asked with interest. "Did you like it?" "Oh, it's such a contrast that I can't even tell you in words." Andrew answered quickly. "It's so technologically advanced that it's breathtaking. You know, I've already called everyone's old numbers, but no one answered except you, of course. It's been so long, everybody's got a different number. Have you seen any of our guys?" "Yeah, Alex and Jenna. Long gone to Los Angeles," he recalled. "Eugene, Kate, and Daniel are working in New York somewhere. And Nancy." The man interrupted him. "You haven't seen her?" "Yes, Nancy stayed in Denver," the fellow student replied. "She worked at our plant." They talked some more, and the man hung up. "So, at the plant," he muttered. "I'll go there today." Andrew left his parents' house, got into his father's car, and drove off. "How did it crash?" With pale lips, Andrew whispered. "Was it dead?" "No," answered the factory worker. "She fell off the old bridge. Miraculously alive, but crippled." "Thank you." The man thanked his interlocutor. "You've helped me a lot." He quickly jumped into the car and drove to the address. He rang the doorbell for a few minutes, but no one answered. He turned around and drove away. Maybe she's bedridden and can't get up at all. The man pondered. It was already about 5 o'clock in the evening when he called Nancy again. But the door this time he didn't give up for long. "Who do you want there?" Finally, an elderly woman came out of the next door. "I'm here to see Nancy." "You don't know if she still lives here." The stranger addressed the neighbor politely. "Yes, she's been gone a month," she sighed. "Poor Nancy, she has not long to live. She asked her husband to take her to the village. She has spinal cancer, so she's living out her last days." Andrew was just overwhelmed. He couldn't deal with his emotions for a long time. "What's wrong?" Finally, he said, "She fell off a bridge and hurt her back." "Through tears," said the woman. "Miraculously survived, but only remained in a wheelchair. And over time, the trauma gave her cancer. The doctor told her that she could live a few more months in nature. So she lives in the countryside with her husband." Nancy asked, "A friend here? No one lives in the apartment." "No, Peter lives here alone. He has to work." "Nancy very expensive. Painkillers are needed," replied the neighbor. "And in which village does she live now?" The man asked impatiently. "Oh, my dear, I won't tell you that, because I don't know," she replied. "That's for you. You should ask her husband." It was about 11 o'clock when the man showed up at the entrance. He was accompanied by a young girl. She smiled playfully at him and kissed him as he walked by. "You're Nancy's husband." Someone came out of the shadows. The man shuddered with fear. He stared at the stranger for a long time. Finally, he pulled himself together. "It's me." Barely audible, he said, "What do you want?" "Has something happened to Nancy?" "I'm Nancy, a friend. We went to college together." Andrew looked at the man. "I need her right away. Can you tell me where Nancy is now?" You could see how much Peter was hesitating. He wanted to say nothing at first, but he thought it would look suspicious. She wanted to move into her grandfather's house. He looked intently into his eyes. "She lives in the settlement now." "Thank you," Andrew said and looked at the woman carefully. He rushed as fast as he could to his car. He decided to go to Nancy's house today. From the map, Andrew determined that it would take him about 4 hours to get there. "What kind of asshole is this?" The man resented him. His wife is dying, and he's taking women home. Andrew warned his parents and set off. The weather outside was not good. All night long, frost, rain. But it did not embarrass the man. It was the beginning of the 4th when he found the house he wanted. The lights were not burning anywhere, so he got there by feel, you might say. Damn, it's locked, he swore. He yanked open the wicket. All right, he climbed over. As long as she was alive. Andrew muttered to himself. The door to the house was closed, too. The man lifted the door up. It tilted to the side with a creak. The hook popped out of the ring and the door opened. Andrew turned on the flashlight. There was no one in the hallway. He stepped into the house. "Nancy, don't be afraid," he said loudly. "Nancy, are you here?" "It's me, Andrew Reznikov. What do you want?" A woman's voice came from far away. "Nancy, don't be afraid." "Andrew, we studied together at the Institute." A man said loudly. "Andrew," she asked, surprised. "What are you doing here?" Finally, the man found the room from which the voice came. He reached out his hand and turned on the light. "Nancy, you're alive. How happy am I to see you?" He ran up to the woman. God, how worried was I. Nancy, a little embarrassed, she covered herself with some old blanket and stared in amazement at her overnight guest. "I'm sorry, after I found out what happened to you. I just couldn't wait until morning through tears," he said. "The most important thing is that you're alive. How did you know where I was?" She said, surprised. "I thought no one knew about it." Your husband almost a whole day out," the man said angrily. "He told me your address and told me he lives in my apartment." Shocked, Nancy asked, "And he's not the only one?" "Sorry, it's none of my business, but he was with some girl." Andrew lowered his head. "What a bastard," she scolded. "You can't believe a word he says." Nancy looked at her carefully. "Andrew, I'll stay in my car until morning and we'll talk about it in the morning." "Yes, it's cold outside," Nancy said thoughtfully. "There's a couch in the hall. Andrew, lie down there." But neither woman nor man could sleep. Half an hour later, Nancy called Andrew, and he came to her at once. Andrew burst into tears. "Anna, I was such a fool, how I didn't realize at once that he never loved me. I don't know what it was. It was as if he conjured me up. I ran after him like a blind kitten. I did everything I could to keep him from asking me. I think it's his fault I fell off that bridge. If I see that place again, I'll remember it all at once. And I see him holding my hand. And then there's a dip, and I'm flying into the water. You think he pushed you?" Andrew asked her in amazement. "Not that he did," but Nancy stopped. "It's like he contributed to it." "But I can't see how." "Nancy, tell me everything from the beginning," her friend asked. "It's very important to me. I know you loved me." The woman looked at him and lowered her eyes. "One day I saw an inscription in your lecture notebook. It's true," he looked at her fondly. "Nancy, I have always loved you. Remember, you once told me that if my deepest interests were hurt, I would fight with my parents." She said quietly. "That's what happened. It was as if Peter had caught me in his net. I was his hypnotist. And as a result, I went against my parents' will for his sake. Not that my parents loved me. Now I'm sure they never did. But back then, I wanted to prove to them that I was worth something without them. I never really loved Peter. But I always felt that if I lost him, I'd go back again. I'd fall back into the abyss I'd spent so many years climbing out of. Fear paralyzed me so much that I didn't understand where my role was and where I really was. Back in college, Peter started cheating on me. I'm sure he had many women. By the time I realized it, it was too late. I was confined to a wheelchair. After I was released from the hospital, he left me almost immediately. I lived alone all that time. He took a portion of my pension since he was granted guardianship. I didn't see any care or help from him. About once a month, he brought me groceries and some household cleaning supplies. For some reason, I didn't say anything to anyone. Andrew couldn't resist. "Why didn't you report him to the police?" "He threatened me," she answered calmly. "I think he could have easily killed me. He was just afraid of getting his hands dirty. And the only person I ever talked to was you. I called your old number once, but it was blocked. I left on purpose so I wouldn't see you honestly," he admitted. "I never got over the fact that you were married. I'm sorry. The only thing that occupied me at the time was the war with my parents," Nancy sighed. "But with them gone, my life only got worse. Everything I dreamed of at the time never came true. When I was given my first disability group, indefinitely, a month later Peter told me I was terminally ill and only had a few months to live. He encouraged me to think that clean air and nature could prolong my life. He just left me here with nothing after giving me a couple $100. If it wasn't for the neighbors, I wouldn't be alive. Okay, I get it. Got up from the chair, Andrew. I'll be back in a couple hours. I need to go to the nearest town. I'll bring you some groceries and clothes. Think about what else I need to buy. Nancy will take care of this case. We're going to Denver tomorrow. I'll take you to the old bridge. The man left the house and drove away in his car. He was angry with himself the whole way for not calling Nancy once in all this time. Proudly idiotic, scolded himself. How many times have I dialed her number but hung up? Maybe if I'd called her anyway, none of this would have happened. 3 hours later, he came back. He was carrying his bags when a man appeared outside the palace. Hello, she put out her hand. You must be Nancy's husband. No, I'm an old friend of hers. He said hello. I guess we won't see the husband here, Andrew said angrily. The man twisted around some more and walked into his yard. Andrew took all the purchases into the house and cooked something in the kitchen. Andrew, thank you. Nancy looked at him. I didn't think I'd ever see you again. Well, enough with the old memories, he said cheerfully. Let's eat lunch and hit the sack. We need a good night's sleep tonight. Andrew slept through the evening. He liked the village, despite all the inconveniences. He felt comfortable here. You know, in Europe, it's not warm at dinner in winter either, he said to Nancy. But you get used to the chill there in winter very quickly. Maybe because there are no real frosts there. In Holland, the coldest was -3 degrees. We can get that even at the end of September, not like in winter. The woman smiled. Nancy, I won't give you to anyone else, Andrew said suddenly. Now we'll sort out your case and I'll take you with me. Nancy blushed. She didn't know what to say. On the one hand, she was used to her solitude. On the other hand, she did not want Andrew to disturb her. Andrew, I'm very grateful to you. But let's leave it at that, Nancy asked. I know you're not ready for that right now. He stroked her face. I'm ready for you the next day. Early in the morning, they set out for Denver. Almost 4 hours later, they were at the old bridge. Andrew carefully put Nancy in a chair and slowly drove to the road span. The woman had already been sitting near where she had fallen for about 10 minutes, eyes closed. It was as if everything came alive in her memory and she saw herself again. Andrew, he squeezed her hand and I couldn't hold on to it. She burst into tears. Grabbing me wouldn't have been any trouble for him. He could have easily gotten me out of there. I don't like this. Peter got nervous. I'd have to check with her. He picked up his cell phone and dialed his wife's number. He didn't get an answer for a long time. Nancy, where are you? He asked thoughtfully. Why aren't you answering? Did something happen to you? Why are you suddenly thinking of me? She asked. For more than a month, you were not interested in what was going on with me. And now, all of a sudden, you're suddenly thinking about me? You have not forgotten that you left me alone in the village and left me $30 for my living. I've been busy all this time. Guiltily, Peter replied. Listen, no one came to see you. Some guy was asking for you. I did, she answered quickly. And what did he want? The man said with interest. He said he had some urgent business with you. What do you care? Coldly, the wife replied. I'm not asking you who you live with in my apartment now. I'm coming to see you today. What should I bring you? He said nervously. I'm really worried about you. Yeah, go to hell. She answered and hung up. But I'll be there today and I'll make it up to you. I've been pounding and pounding. Peter, I'm not gonna let you live. That thing must be up to something. Did she forget who's the victim and who's the master? It's okay. I'll remind her today. The man took the papers and quickly got into his car. Peter didn't know how long he would be in the village, so he dialed Svet's familiar number. I'll be late tonight. It's cold, he said. I'm going to the village. Nancy must be finished. The doctors gave her 2 months, so her time is almost up. Good luck to you. My love sang behind the girl's playful voice. I'll be looking forward to seeing you. Peter opened the wicket gate in a frenzy and ran into the village house. Nancy was sitting in the kitchen. What do you want here? She was frightened. Why have you come here? Have you forgotten that you were my wife? Nancy laughed nervously. He wanted to see what's going on here. So how's the challenge in your voice? Asked her look. Well, you can flunk out now. Nancy, why are you pissing me off? Walked over and looked her right in the eye. Have you forgotten who your master is? I was never your thing, she shouted. Get out of here. Have you got some nerve? He grabbed the woman by the throat. You had 2 months to live anyway. Nancy managed to break free, and she quickly pulled away. Was it you who gave me that kind of deadline? The woman said loudly. You think I don't know that you tried to kill me on the bridge? And you failed. And then, when I became an invalid, it became more difficult to get rid of me. Because then you'd be under suspicion. I should have shoved you in with all my might. You'd be long gone by now. The man shouted angrily. And I was a fool to spare you and just shook your hand. You're a liar. She looked him in the face. You've always lied to me, but you're right about that. He laughed. But before you die, you'll finally know the truth. I killed your parents. Yes, I'm the one who made you fall off the bridge. And I drove you to a remote village so you could die here. I can't understand why. Why did you do all that? Nancy asked him. Didn't you want to get rid of your parents? Peter looked at her intently. What did the astonished woman say? You want to pin their murder on me? Maybe I threw them off a bridge as well. To commit suicide. Or am I a complete idiot to come to the village in such a state? How have you tortured me already? The man looked at her angrily and walked closer to her. I think I've heard enough already, heard someone's voice behind her back. You guys get out. Sarge, cuff him. Peter saw his wife's acquaintance come out of the other room, accompanied by 4 policemen. Several people from the neighborhood were also hiding there. Everything will be all right now. Andrew walked up to Nancy and put his arm around her. You look her in the eye when you talk. William was teaching William some man. Through the window, there were people in white coats looking at him. They were watching him closely. He has extreme narcissism, said one psychiatrist, and a complete lack of empathy. Where did you find him? The female doctor wondered. Such specimens are extremely rare. After the death of his 3rd wife, the police accidentally came across information that he had been married several times. The psychiatrist replied. They became interested and made a file on him. Favi had his first wife in a psychiatric hospital, and before that her grandmother died of a stroke. The man became the sole heir to their estate. Then he remarried. This time the girl had an invalid father. 6 months later, he accidentally fell out of the window when no one was at home. And 2 years later, the girl cut her wrists. A year later, our patient got married again. This time the girl's parents lived far to the north, and all the property belonged to her alone. 8 months later, she crashed her car. Didn't get in at high speed. So during the difficult years of married life, he managed to accumulate good wealth. From the outside, he looks quite adequate, surprised the 3rd doctor. Yes, he is, sighed the woman. He has the innate gift of hypnosis. If you're out of the loop, you can easily mistake him for a normal person. I've talked to him. The patient puts you in such mental traps that you can't help but marvel. Over time, you begin to realize that human life means nothing to him. Did he just kill his victims? Did the man persist? No, he's not interested, the doctor replied. He suppresses other people's will to do whatever he wants. So William convinced his 2nd wife that only by killing himself would she make him happy. The patient never smeared his own hands. But here he would be quickly brought back to reality, laughed the psychiatrist. I've seen how Napoleon is already interested in him. And the Pope is already looking at him with interest. So he'll have plenty of friends here. Still, it's a very rare case, the woman sighed. People like him are very hard to catch. They adapt themselves to normal people, and not only poison them, but also take the lives of others in the most insidious ways. After we study him, it will be easier to catch others, said the doctor. Andrew, look how beautifully happy Nancy was here, like a child. She was spinning in her electric wheelchair like a wolf among the flowers. They had come to the famous tulips and fields near Amsterdam. The man looked lovingly at his wife. The couple had already been in the Netherlands for almost 6 months. And Nancy was being prepared for a major operation. Her doctor had a very encouraging prognosis. "Nancy, do you like it here?" Smiling, the husband approached his wife. "Andrew, I'm just happy." She raised her hands to the sky to her beloved. "I feel like I'm going to walk again." They walked along the colorful fields. Nancy, like a little girl, did not hide her emotions. "God, it's so good to just live. I thought she didn't need much for that. Why didn't I realize it before? I was waiting for something. At first, I longed for the love of my parents. I thought, if I please them in everything, I'll wake up one morning and they'll throw themselves on my neck with joy." Then I waited a long time for Peter to do the same. How it seemed to me then that if I became the perfect wife and obey him in everything, and he'd love me right away. I've dreamed all my life that someone would love me, but I didn't even realize that I never loved myself. Only Andrew helped me see that, and I finally came to life. I love myself, and I don't have to prove anything to anyone. I don't need to beg anyone. Andrew just loves me without any requests. That's true happiness. How many years have I dreamed of this? The man rejoiced to himself. How many times in my dreams I called her wife? And at last it has happened. All I want is for Nancy to be happy. It's not her illness that bothers me. Not that she was once married, I don't care. I love only her. I don't need anyone else. They walked slowly between the clubs, looking at the flowers. Nothing troubled them anymore. But it was easy on the soul. Nancy had quickly become accustomed to life abroad, and she liked it very much in Holland. She was not ashamed of being an invalid. Here no one paid any attention to it. "Andrew, I had such a strange dream last night. I remembered Nancy. I caught 2 huge fish on a fishing rod. A fisherman came up to me and said, 'How good is your catch? The bigger fish must be a girl. How much caviar does she have? This one's a little smaller. It must be a boy.' Andrew smiled and hugged Nancy, and she squeezed her eyes shut, and tears of happiness rolled down her cheeks.